Today we have Esha with us, the author of Working to Restore, and we're very, very excited about it.
I couldn't believe that we were going to get to talk to you because I so enjoyed reading the book. Part of the context for us is we're building a course on regeneration for small businesses to integrate principles into their practice that will go in that direction. And so your book was very inspiring and also contains so many good examples of people doing great work out there.
I've been reporting on this space for about 15 years now. And I've seen the evolution from what was corporate social responsibility and social entrepreneurship, and now mission-driven brands, and now we're talking about regeneration. But 5 years ago, almost now, when I set out to start this book project, people weren't talking about regenerative. People weren't talking about some of these themes as deeply. This book was actually supposed to come out a little bit earlier, and then it got delayed because of the pandemic. My idea was, look, there's books out there that have been written by the entrepreneurs themselves and tell their stories, but there hadn't been, at least I hadn't seen, anything that was just an overview of the landscape that was easy to read for a broader audience beyond those who are interested in sustainability. I stayed away from corporations because it's far more complicated. They're working on a very different financial model. There's been a few books that have been written by folks in the think tank sector and consultants that do use examples from Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and all these guys. But I just stayed away, and I looked really more at companies that had been around for about 10 years, had shown that their model works. And it's not to say that they may not be in existence down the road. It's a business, anything can happen. But they'd shown that there was some success there, that there was something that was really working. So it wasn't a startup, and it wasn't something that was like this 50-year-old legacy brand. It was somewhere in between. And the question that I kept getting as a journalist all the time was, well, I don't know who to support, or what can I do in my life where I'm not an expert in sustainability? You can start with some of these companies. And of course, none of them are perfect, but they're a good starting place. So that was the inception of the book. And then I set out for about 2 years. I kindly was given a grant, and I actually went and I saw most of the companies that are in the book. I went and I saw their operations, if I hadn't already, and spent time on the ground and really got to see if they had a supply chain, how that operated. Spent time with the founders and the CEOs, got to see their workplace. The approach I've always taken with my reporting has been very empathetic to communities that have not received the same amount of attention and recognition. Now it's very trendy. About 10 years ago, it was definitely not the mainstream thing. And so I think that's affected my lens on reporting, is that I really do try to be thinking about communities that are being impacted by all the policies and the kind of top level work that's being done. And I, early on in my career, met David Bornstein, who's an incredible writer and journalist. He's based out of New York. And he started something called the Solutions Journalism Network. And this was before he'd even started the network. We were just really writing about the problems. And I was like, we know we have problems in the world, but why don't we highlight some of these innovative solutions? And so that also framed my journalistic lens. I've really devoted most of my career to writing about solutions. It's very rarely that I've written stories that are just focusing on a problem in society. And I think that's important, that we look at those solutions with also a critical eye. It's not to say everything is perfect and all these solutions are ideal, but it starts to get the dialogue going. And as time has gone on, whenever I'm chatting with people or doing events, people are always saying, I'm tuning out of the news. I don't watch the news anymore, or I don't read the headlines anymore because it's just depressing. And so there's this clear fatigue, right, with bad news and just every day coming at you. And so how do we as writers, as journalists, as storytellers help people shift away from that to what are these hopeful solutions?
I truly appreciate the part that you're saying about solutions also, because there's this talk about a crisis of imagination, and we don't know how to make things differently, how to envisage that the future can be different. I've been part of a research where a group in Turkey and a group in Portugal were investigating how people who are engaged in renewable energy are actually how did they start? How do they envision the kind of work that they do and everything? And the way they were positioning themselves in that space. And because they were in business, they were saying, yeah, we love the environment, but we're not tree huggers. And there was this idea that if you're for the environment, then you are in the woo-woo land, or like you have this dreamy or hippie attitude towards the world, and you're not taking responsibility for the world. And one of the reasons why your book is so inspiring is because you very specifically show that this is workable, and these solutions do work.
It's a really important thing. The key takeaway when I talk to all these entrepreneurs is it has to be profitable. It has to be a business also. So yes, we are working on social and environmental issues, but at its core, it's a business. Now, the difference is that you're rethinking that model of business, right? How much profit do you really need to make? Can you share that profit? Can you turn it and make it cyclical so it goes back into some kind of actual change-making work? But at the end of the day, it has to be profitable. I mean, even in the opening chapter, I remember talking to the Lundbergs, and they said, look, organics is only going to take off when it's actually profitable for farmers. And right now we're at less than 2% in the US of organic farmland. And the reason is economics. It's not necessarily like they don't have the will or desire to do it. They need a market, they need a clear supply chain that makes it easy for them to do it, and they need it to be a profitable venture. And so one of my frustrations was 2005, 2006, and I was in DC, and there was so much buzz around civil society and nonprofits and, the development community. And I thought it was all fantastic. But the issue with the third sector was, right, that you're just throwing money at problems. And then how do you make those organizations financially sustainable? So the conversation then was, how do we involve some of the principles of the private sector into the third sector and create something of a hybrid, which was social entrepreneurship? And I think that's really the core of it. It's gotten new names and it's evolved, but that's really what it is still. We're still trying to get large corporations or small to medium-sized companies to think about what problem it is that they're going to solve. And that's the fundamental difference, I think, is that when a Unilever comes and says, we're running this campaign because it's sustainable, it's not the core focus of their company. The core focus of their company still is really making profits by selling X, Y, and Z product. But when you have a brand that starts with inception saying, we really want to address an issue in the Amazon, or we really want to address plastic waste, and that's where we're starting from, that's the problem we're trying to solve, and maybe soap is the vehicle that we do it, or shoes are the vehicle that we do it, it's a very different approach. And I think that's the evolution that's beginning to happen in business. But are huge global companies going to do it? That's the part that I'm not entirely sure about. I hope they do. We are seeing improvement with some of them, but it's much harder road for them. I like your focus of small to medium-sized companies because it's very doable for them. And there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands and millions of these. So if we can even get those folks to do it, fantastic.
I really love what you said about values driven. It has to be company wide, and also that we're solving a problem. Our main driver is solving a problem. Is there a specific company that you noticed as you're researching that really stood out to you as being values driven and like really attacking their problem in a way that showed results?
Yeah, one of the best examples is Veja. I think they're kind of a unique company. They're just really mission-driven company. But the two guys who started it, Sebastian and Francois, they knew nothing about fashion, like literally nothing. So for them to go into this sneaker world was pretty ballsy. And then on top of that, they were not from Brazil. They didn't speak fluent Portuguese, but they decided to set up their whole supply chain there. They went and they spent a lot of time on the ground learning the language, understanding the culture. But their goal was, we're selling shoes, but what we really want to do is protect these rubber trees in the Amazon. And we really want to just change the way fashion operates at its core and show a different model that can happen with a lighter carbon footprint. I think that's a really interesting approach to a fashion company. You don't see that, right? Most fashion companies start with a designer who has an aesthetic, and then they'll try to weave in certain materials and certain supply chains, but they're not starting from, we're doing this because we want to protect certain trees or we want to protect a certain part of the planet. That's a very different approach. And sometimes I ask, are they an anomaly?
Absolutely. And it makes me smile. And the energy of that is contagious. When you read the example in the book, it's like, oh, it's so possible. And they're modeling it in such a way that it's inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is hard. It takes time. I think why don't other companies do it? Because it takes time and it takes commitment and it takes leadership. And you also do have to think about profit. I have seen some high street brands who could maybe pay 50 cents extra and include a more ethical material in their product, but instead they don't do that because for them, profit is the focus. So there's a few components there that you really do need to be committed to. But I think it's happening and it's slowly evolving because also the public is getting smarter. The scrutiny is getting more. So I actually think it's great when you see these articles that come out about carbon offsets not working and all, and everybody freaks out. But I'm like, it's that scrutiny that's going to get us to a better answer. Look at a company like Beja. They've been doing carbon insetting without really calling it that, basically, right? Because they're investing in this particular part of the planet. So when they get called out for their mistakes, it's a good part of the evolution. It's going to take them longer. It's going to be a longer ride for them, but they're beginning to get on that path now.
I work a lot in the sustainable finance space. I came to the Carbon Almanac and saw that there was a missing link between businesses really understanding what they could do and how important they were systemically versus the greenwashers and others. And there really are some companies out there that are working very hard to transition, and they aren't sitting on their hands and faking it. They're literally trying to do it. Of course, they're facing many difficult challenges, especially financial institutions. You do have to have very strong commitments, and then there's the regulations that come in. But I was thinking about the disruptors, and I actually have a quote here, which I just love from the book. It's not just people in New York City and Los Angeles who are rich and foo-foo and can afford to think about it. Now you have moms in the Midwest who want their kids to be healthy and think about their carbon footprint. And that was from Nick Green, of course, of Thrive Market. They're disrupting the whole model. And the cool thing is, I heard about this from my daughter, who is a very sensible, forward-thinking, I would say a very green type of a person. What you said, though, was really important to me. You said, you can't just make a product that doesn't work. It has to solve a problem. And that's what seems like that's what Thrive Market did.
Thrive's story is really interesting. If you ever get a chance to listen to a podcast by Nick or Gunnar, the two co-founders, they tried for years to raise capital and they were getting turned down because they kept going to investors that were along the West Coast, right? So these guys can pop down to a Whole Foods or a Sprouts or any health food store and buy these groceries. And so for them, they were like, I don't get it. What's the big deal? But when they turned to a blogger in the Midwest who had a large audience, she tried the product and she said, oh, this is great, and shared it with her community. They finally were able to unlock that capital that they needed. And I've seen this personally. I've been traveling a lot this year to promote the book. There are communities that I've been where you can't necessarily find health foods very easily. You start to realize, okay, this stuff still has potential. There's still miles that we have to reach. And that's where Thrive is filling that gap. And Thrive has also had its bumps in the road. Thrive is sending a product in the mail. That means shipping. That means packaging. That means the use of some plastics possibly. And they've tested all kinds of materials to get rid of single-use plastics. But it's something that is worthwhile. So if you're sitting somewhere in part of America where you cannot get to a Trader Joe's or a Sprouts and you want to buy that kind of food, where do you turn to? And if you can get it 2 to 3 days on your doorstep, it has value. But again, Thrive is another one where it took them a long time to really get it off the ground. Even experienced entrepreneurs like themselves were struggling to get this idea. And that's the other thing, is that a lot of them, when you talk to them about their early days, they'll say, people thought we were just nuts to do this. But because they see 10 years down the road, they have that vision.
A lot of the companies that you use in the book as examples were created with the regenerative mindset from the get-go, from the inception of the business. Do you think it's possible for businesses to transition, existing businesses to transition?
It's a really good question. It's been something I've been thinking about a lot as well. I think it is. I think it is possible. But again, it means that if you don't have that leadership at the top, it's not going to happen. Because what I've seen on the inside is that you have sustainability departments and they're good people with good intentions, but they're in a department and they're often siloed. So there might be 4 or 5 people, depending on the size of the company. And then they have to convince everybody else, whether it's the C-suites or whether it's the folks on the manufacturing side. And that is the really challenging part. I almost feel like if you can convert the top, the C-suite, then the rest of it will happen faster and quicker. It can certainly happen. I don't think that it cannot happen. Where it becomes complicated, though, is for publicly traded companies. And that's the one that I'm waiting to see how this plays out, because they really do need to focus on those quarterly returns. And that's the part that's really a sticky point. But yes, can you transition? Absolutely. I mean, you look at a company like Patagonia, right? Patagonia has evolved so much in the last 50 years, right? They weren't doing organic cotton always. They weren't doing recycled polys always. They weren't doing PFAS-free always. And they have significant supply chains. I mean, their supply chains are not anything small, but the leadership was there. The will was there. And so if that is there, then yeah, you can move the needle. You can shift a supply chain.
There's this theme throughout the book. On the one hand, you have capitalism, and on the other, you have humanness and what it means to be a human. And the disconnect seems very, very strong. What we were just saying right now, these big companies that think only of profit and forget that they are like, they work with people, they're made up of people, they are serving people. Would you say that these companies that are regenerative, are they breaking the mold of capitalism?
For sure. I think what they're hitting at is one word, which is greed. And that's the thing that really drives me mad. Because if you look at capitalism, like if I create a product and I do it as thoughtfully as I can and as fairly as I can, and I sell it to you, there's nothing wrong with that per se, right? That's why people love to support handmade products or products from small businesses. And that's still part of capitalism. So I don't think it's that. I think it's the greed that is really the culprit of all of this. When you look at some of that crazy CEO pay, it just makes my blood boil, because that is money that could be allocated somewhere else in the company and create more equity. So I think people are really fed up of the inequality and the greed that capitalism breeds. And that's a specific type, almost like a genre of business. That's really why I devoted a whole chapter to those models that were looking at profit sharing, employee ownership, things like that, employing people that you wouldn't typically employ. That really shows compassion and empathy and an understanding of your human existence. You have a finite amount of time on the planet. Why are you so obsessed with creating infinite wealth? Because it is finite. We have to accept that. I think that is the real mood point in capitalism. That is the problem. It's not just the exchange of goods. It's really at what expense?
As we're promoting our course, we're talking about doing well by doing good, so that you can still make money being regenerative, but to know what is enough. There is that cap of what makes a person comfortable and happy. And then they say that the studies all show that above that doesn't make you any happier, really any more comfortable, because you've now got all these extra worries in your life. So being able to know where is that line of enough. And I think a lot of the companies that you talked about, the people in your interviews seem to have that. They know where is enough, and then they can reinvest into their business.
You mean, you hit the nail on the head. This is actually the closing thought for my TED Talk that I'm doing. This question of how much is enough. It's the question that has come up so many times as I've been doing reporting for this book and otherwise. It's almost like a dicey area that you're not supposed to go into, but I feel like these people understand the purpose of their human existence, or the insignificance of that purpose of that human existence. And so you have to definitely draw the line of what is enough. What is enough personally for you? And then also what is enough for your company? We celebrate success and hustle culture and growth and scale and all of that. And some of these companies, like Toast, has kind of said, you know what, we're content at this point, at this scale. And that's good enough for us. And so maybe we'll grow a little bit more gradually as the years go by, but this is good enough. And then I say in the intro that what fatigues you also, that's what creates a problem. So if you sort of simplify life a little bit, it gives you the space to breathe and to also enjoy life. I'm hearing it more and more from people now as well. I don't know if it's just the tech influx and also everybody feeling kind of overworked during the pandemic and all, but I feel like more and more people are waking up to this reality of, I don't need to be the next big thing. I can just do something that really fulfills my soul, takes care of my family, pays for my livelihood, and then put some of the rest of the resources and wealth into whatever it is, whether it's charity, whether it's a company, whatever it is you're inspired by.
I think there's also the piece about being in relationship with nature and not just taking, but also giving and finding that balance. And a lot of these companies have done that. And I think that's admirable because then they can weave in some conservation, much needed conservation work, and dear to my heart to support those causes.
It's also now there's this shift that's happening where companies are realizing that if they destroy that environment, it's like, well, you're going to kill your supply chain down the road eventually then, especially at the corporate level. They're beginning to see this connection. And I think that's why you're seeing some of these larger conglomerates talking about regenerative ag and talking about these kinds of principles, because they're realizing that, oh gosh, we really do need to invest in the soils, or we really do need to invest in the ecosystem. And that goes back to, if the way to convince people is to make them understand the economic model, like the fact that it's also for their own long-term financial stability, then maybe that is the road we have to take with certain companies. It would be nice if everybody obviously thought about it in a way that we are symbiotic with nature. I've seen this a lot in chocolate, in coffee, in ag, where you're seeing that companies, the really big brands, are now saying, wait a minute, we can't extract the way that we used to, because their yields are dropping, and the farmers are also quitting in droves. That's the other thing, is that when you get out into parts of Africa, parts of South Asia, you meet the farmers. They're all aging. Their children don't want to do it. They're leaving for the big cities because they can make more money doing work there. So it's a ripple effect in that way as well.
I was going to go back to the question of greed, because to me, when you phrase it as greed, it has all these almost religious connotations, if you will. And it goes back to human nature, and this is how we are. We can't help it. And some of us are lucky and don't have too much of it, or perhaps if you view it from the other side, we have so much of it. We're so great, we're so competitive. And to me, this is like, what if it is about the stories that we tell ourselves? And what if it is about, well, again, I'm going to come back to the lack of imagination. What if you've been working in these big companies for so long that you don't know what to do anything besides making money? So I'm in my 40s, and the people around me have come somewhere in their lives, and quite a few of them are in the corporate world. And one thing that I noticed is that there is a special category of them who keep talking about money. And it's all about money. And sometimes it's difficult, like, yes, that's important, but what do you do for fun? And then it goes, yeah. So the conversation sort of stops. And I get this sense that they want to do more. They want to be different, but they don't know how. So they go back to, yeah, let's make more money because I know how to do that.
That is a hard one. I am what my friends and I, we jokingly call, we're geriatric millennials. I'm in my mid-30s and late 30s, I guess you could say. And so it's interesting. We are getting at the point where we're seeing our friends who've climbed the corporate ladder or climbed the success ladder. They're hitting burnout like badly. They're getting to a point where they're just like, this is great, but I feel terrible. My health is not great. What am I doing? And so there is an awakening that happens. Some people just get it early on. I don't know if they're old souls or whatever. And some people just, they got to get all the way down to 65. And then they realize, what did I do with my life? And so I think that is a hard thing. It's also like who you surround yourself with, who you spend time with, how your time is being spent. So if you're staying in that echo chamber, in that bubble of working a corporate job every day, surrounding yourself with people who are doing the exact same thing and just focused on money, 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 it is hard. I mean, I'm seeing this across the board. There is burnout for sure. People are seriously really burnt out by these jobs. And it's that burnout that then makes them reflect. Or during the pandemic, we saw a lot of people dealing with health issues, and that's what made them reflect as to, what am I doing with my time?
Another famous quote, you probably don't remember, and this is going to show my age, but Gary Payton, famous basketball player from Seattle, he signed the largest contract at the time in the history of basketball. They asked him, well, is $90 million enough? He goes, how much money do you need? He says, I can't spend it all. And this is the guy from the inner city of Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
And if more people like that and more people say things like that, we don't have that marketing machine saying it's all about financial aggrandizement. It's about actually enjoying your life, getting back to nature, going out and being with people and all of those things. And the pandemic exacerbated that. People said, I'm not around people anymore. And they all of a sudden realized they wanted to be, but they want to do it on their terms. So I just think you have so many great examples in the book of people who just said, I'm going to get back to doing something in a more sensible way, back to my humanity. It's not all, peace and love and everything. It just makes sense. And I don't know why that message is so hard to get through. I wondered if you had thoughts about that.
Completely. I mean, my own experience has been you go to a lot of networking events, conferences, things like that. You come across people that are very wealthy and influential, right? They're not happy. They're not content. And you see it over and over again. It is wild to me that this message does not get across. I am seeing a shift, though. We are having far more discussion about work-life balance than we ever have. People are really interested in working fewer hours, 4 days a week, pilots at companies, things like that. So I think people are beginning to get it. But at the same time, we're also living in the era of TikTok and Shein and these kind of things that are just focused on mass culture and mass consumption. And that's what worries me.
I was thinking, as you were talking about being a child of the 80s, 90s, and the stories we were told back then, the 80s were called the me generation for a reason. And the stories we were told is that it's okay to be selfish and it's okay to want to have stuff. And television is full of all these things that we should want to buy. And you'd go to school with the new thing and everybody would want to be your friend.
The stories have definitely changed. Yeah, 80s and 90s was the peak of all these brands just marketing to you. And that was the cool thing to do. However, the only other thing that I would add to that is also, I do feel like we lived simpler lives in the 80s and 90s. And that inherently affects a lot of this stuff. I mean, the lifestyles that we're living these days, I feel like are part of the problem also. It's just we're cramming so much stuff into our lives, and whether it's physical stuff or it's travel or it's work stuff, and that also is having an impact, a physical impact on the planet, but it's also obviously having a mental impact on all of us. What can an individual do? And that's what I get asked the most is, should I stop taking flights? No, you don't need to necessarily stop taking flights entirely, but you could travel somewhere for a longer period of time if your work allows that, and just do slow travel. And that would also hopefully give you an experience that's more enriching. Tone, she started this business with her husband in the heart of cruise country. When you go to this little town in Norway, it's fascinating. It's literally a tiny little town called Flom. You go outside your hotel room in the morning and there's just a massive cruise parked right in front of your balcony. And then there's probably like 30,000 people descending onto that tiny little village. And they're there for maybe a day, maybe 2 days at most. And it's so disruptive to that whole environment. And so she has taken a different approach where she'll take you down into like a little wooden boat onto the fjord. And then you'll have a picnic and you'll do some hikes and things like that. It's a much slower approach to travel. While the cruise is super convenient for people to go hopping from fjord to fjord to fjord, it just seems so out of place. And then she talks about being a journalist and having that background of how it's affecting the environment and how it's affecting the waters there and all of that.
It's also making a shift from what we feel is easy and convenient to a shift towards what feels better and sometimes requires a little bit more research, but you know that you are doing good through your actions.
Absolutely. And I think there is a shift happening. I mean, I see it in health and wellness a lot. I also live in the mecca of health and wellness. There's so many natural brands coming about now to address different gaps by the pharmaceuticals. So people are going to their doctors. They're not content with what they're getting in terms of the drugs that they're being prescribed. It's sort of masking a problem rather than solving a problem. So what are people turning to? They're turning to natural, holistic medicine, and they are finding that it's working. And so now it's almost like every 2 weeks you see a new brand that will crop up, and soon enough they'll be on Target store shelves and things like that, because people are seeking a connection with themselves and with nature again. So they're using herbs, they're using foods of the earth to try to heal their bodies.
That own journey for me was started by having a simple plant that was able to produce my herbal tea in my backyard, and it grew from there. And I know you have a special connection with tea. Do you want to talk a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So in 2019, I started a company. A friend and I, we had been working in this sector for 10 years. We'd known each other for many years. She had been working for a lot of these organizations. So she worked for Ashoka, she worked for X, which is Google's R&D arm, looking at climate stuff and all. And we both were ready to put our values into action. So we started a tea company. And in the US, coffee had really taken off. Third wave coffee is a big thing. People were really getting into how they were brewing their coffee, but we didn't see that in tea. And I had incidentally spent 2016 and 2017 in the tea growing regions in India, doing some stories about climate change. And it was really eye-opening to hear from them directly about how it was affecting their crop. A lot of tea is grown on slopes at the base of the Himalayas in that country. And so you would see these women that would go out there. I mean, God bless them. They would get up and go at 4 a.m. and walk and down to these slopes and pluck tea. And so they were standing on an incline like this. But the problem is, because of climate change and having a lot of heavy rainfall, the soils were beginning to weaken on some of the estates. They were just slipping and sliding, and the soils were eroding. And that's when some of the estates were starting to realize, the ones that had been doing conventional ag, they said, we need to start taking care of our soil. We need to start figuring out this, because soon enough, all of this is just going to erode and we're going to lose our tea bushes. And so we decided to start a tea company, and it's not perfect, but it's our attempt of putting some of these things into action. We work directly with regenerative, organic, and biodynamic growers. We package it all in compostable packaging. We spent 2 years looking at packaging, and it's a nightmare. We do only loose leaf. And in 2019, when we started, the BBC came out with this article that talked about plastics and tea bags, and people were blown away that even the paper tea bags, they still have the plastic frame and then the paper is applied to it. So we said, you know what, we'll do loose leaf. And again, everybody told us also that, I think you're a bit nuts. And we have been building it slowly during the pandemic, and it's been a fun side hustle, you could say. We spend a lot of time on the weekends and in the evenings working on it, but we're now in about, I want to say like about 100 retailers on the coasts, and we're now getting into grocery, and we've been doing corporate gifting and events, and it's been fun. And it makes you realize, for me especially, that it can be done. It's not cost prohibitive. Other brands can do this if they really wanted to. The only issue is we've all gotten used to, especially in food and fashion, things being super cheap. And I don't know if we can do it at that price point. Can we produce ethical coffee at $2 a bag or $4 a bag or even $5 a bag? It's hard. It's really hard. The price point has to be a little bit higher, but I don't think it needs to be crazy high.
So would you call your business regenerative?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think no business is going to be able to check all the boxes and, do everything. But we definitely started with that goal. We wanted to be very eco-forward. It's also self-funded. It's just me and my business partner have funded this. So we're going to grow it based on cash and cash flow. And we have really thought through every layer of this as much as possible. So yeah, for sure.
So now that you've started your own regenerative business, what advice would you give to someone who sort of just, it's an idea in their mind and they haven't taken the first step?
First advice I always give to people, whether you're writing a book, starting a company, doing whatever, is just do it. If you really want to do it, just do it. You're never going to have everything ready, and it's never going to be the ideal time. And we started at the end of 2019, going into 2020. It was the worst time, people would say, to start a company, because our cost of shipping went from $3,000 a container to $20,000 a container. It was crazy trying to manage those shipping costs, but we made it through. We made some compromises elsewhere and we made it through. So you have to do it. You just have to dive in and do it. I am not the most renowned tea expert in the world, but it was something that I felt like I could contribute to the marketplace on. So I dove in and did it. I think that's one advice. The second advice is just be very, very, very clear on who you bring on board for financing. I've seen so many companies really struggle because of the financial structure, because of the investors that they brought on. Because that will really determine how you can run the company for years to come. So that's the other thing. And the last thing I would say is surround yourself with people who are willing to go on that really bumpy road with you. It is not ever a straight line. Surround yourself with people that are open to discussion, open to debate, and open to thinking outside their viewpoint. It's just so important to be able to work with people who are really, truly willing to be collaborative. Those would be my 3 key takeaways. And, you better love it because you're going to be doing this in your sleep. So you better really love the topic or industry that you're getting into.
One of the biggest drivers ever is for people to see success. People love success, and success looks different to a lot of people. And maybe it won't always be about money, and hopefully it'll be more and more about what they're getting out of it. I loved one comment from the book. I can't remember the name, but he said, "Why should I be talking about exit strategy? I want to make this thing work for years and years and years." That's exactly the way I would think you would look at any new business if you were starting it.
I agree. It's something that, especially if you love it, why not do it for 10, 20 years? If it really fulfills you in more ways than one, you should be captivated enough to do it for longer. Most people go into business and entrepreneurship because 1, they want freedom. They don't want to work for somebody else. And then 2 is because they feel like they have an idea that is valuable, that they want to put out there in the world. I mean, do you really want to graduate from that and then go back to working in an office or back to doing a 9 to 5? Probably not. So why not ride that wave for a longer period of time?
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful, wonderful conversation.
I hope it was helpful, and it's always nice to chat with folks who are on the same wavelength.
I would like to say one last thing to you, by the way, that I wanted to say at the beginning. It was so gratifying to read your book, and this is not blowing smoke. It was amazing how I could tell you had really sat with these people. You really knew them, because when you read books sometimes where an author takes an approach of, oh, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, let's talk about that. You can tell it's surface knowledge. And if you've worked in an industry, you know when they don't really get it. And I felt you got it with every one of those stories. You weren't an expert in them, but you could get it because maybe it's because those entrepreneurs really got it, and they had a good way of expressing their story and telling their story. And that resonated throughout the book. It actually made it joyful to go through those pages.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot also coming from people who live and breathe this stuff. I mean, because you know this industry and you know the players, and it's lovely to hear that I was able to relay their stories authentically. So thank you very much.